Tracy, thank you so much. I guess it was probably, 5 or 6 years ago, and so that would have put Andrew around 9 or 10. He's 16 now. And Nathan, at some point beforehand, had gotten a fairly inexpensive drone. $35, $40, because they can get quite expensive, but this one that Nathan had was pretty cheap. And so Nathan had figured out how to fly this thing, and he'd had it for a little while. And that year for Christmas, Andrew said he'd like to have one of those drones. And so for Christmas, among the things that he received was that. And so once you get out of the box, you plug it in, you charge it, and it doesn't take long, and it's ready to fly. And so he and Nathan go out in the front yard, because our front yard is really pretty wide open. There's like one tree, and there's not a whole lot of stuff to be a bother. And so Andrew is, I guess, fumbling with this thing for the first time, just trying to get it off the ground. It's like some of y'all getting out of the bed this morning. And so anyway, just trying to get up this thing off the ground. And Nathan is trying to give him instruction because he has the exact same drone. And the last statement that Andrew said was, "Be quiet, I know what I'm doing." You remember that one tree that I told you we had? Well, that one tree on the highest branch captures this drone that is, for Andrew, it's minutes old at this point. I mean, he has just gotten this thing on Christmas morning, and it is now stuck in the highest branch of the tree in our yard. And we are trying to figure out, is there anything that we can do? And honestly, short of chopping the tree down, there was nothing we could do to get this silly drone out of it. And we thought it'll probably, in short order, maybe it'll fall out. So some days pass, some weeks pass, some months pass, years pass. This tree leaves, they fall, but the drone is still in the tree. I don't know, you remember the other year when Hurricane Michael, or the remnants of it, came through Greensboro. I thought, that's going to get the drone out of the tree. Drone was still in the tree. Finally, about a year ago, I have no idea, maybe the branch rotted, I don't know, but that thing finally, years later, has dropped down out of this tree. But it wound up in there with these famous words, "Be quiet, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing." Hold that thought for just a second and consider this fact. And you know it to be true. Everybody, everywhere, is gifted. And there are things that you are uniquely capable of doing. Now, that being said, I understand that the New Testament talks about what are specifically described as spiritual gifts, and I believe that to be a thing of its own. But beyond that, the reality is, saved people, lost people, all people have all kinds of gifts and talents. They do. I mean, because you don't have to be a follower of Christ to be able to be a good musician. And some people come into this world and their mind, like stuff just clicks musically. Whether it's ease in learning an instrument, whether it's grasping music theory, they just kind of get it. Other people, numbers, it's like that's their native tongue. In fact, speaking of tongues, others, they're just really gifted at languages. And they have an insanely unusual ability to be able to learn a new language and begin to be able to speak it fluently and operate interchangeably culture to culture as it relates to speaking. And so that they have all of these unique talents, unique gifts. And that's true of everyone. It's true of people that have a relationship with God. It's true of people that don't have a relationship with God. Now here's the question. We've been thinking about this series that I'm calling The Cloud. Thinking spiritually about earthly things. Is it the case that I, as a follower of Christ, or you as a follower of Christ, should think about or use my giftedness the same way that someone who doesn't have a relationship with the Lord does? It stands to reason that there ought to be some difference, and that the ways in which God has uniquely gifted me, how He's wired me to work, and the tools that I came into this world that were in my tool belt that I didn't necessarily acquire, but God just put those in there for me. So should I be using those or possessing those in ways that are different than those that don't have a relationship with the Lord? Hopefully you would say, well, yes, Michael, that there should be a difference. And so that leads us to this question. If I am a gifted person, and I am, If you are a gifted person, and you are, the question is, are you using that gift or those gifts the right way? Or are you maybe like Andrew saying, I know what I'm doing, and you're taking those gifts and parking them in the top of a tree? Let's see how the Bible answers that question today in Judges chapter 16. Judges chapter 16, and I have been teaching through Judges on Wednesdays, and so for those that come either to the morning or evening Bible study, there's going to be a little bit of review here. We're going to pick this up midstream, but we're going to start with verse 16, where we're told, and this is talking about Delilah, that's the she in verse 16, because she, Delilah, nagged him, that's Samson, day after day, and pleaded with him until she wore him out. He told her the whole truth and said to her, my hair has never been cut because I'm a Nazirite to God from birth. If I'm shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man. When Delilah realized that he had told her the whole truth, she sent this message to the Philistine leaders. Come one more time, because he's told me the whole truth. The Philistine leaders came to her and brought the silver with them. Then she let him fall asleep on her lap and called a man to shave off the 7 braids on his head. In this way she made him helpless, and his strength left him. And then she cried, Samson, the Philistines are here. And when he awoke from his sleep, he said, I will escape as I did before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. I want you to see that Samson is a guy who is uniquely gifted. Now, his gift is different than mine. His gift is likely different than yours. But I want you to understand that he is a guy who is gifted. And he serves us an example of how we can answer this question about whether we're using those gifts the right way. And based on what we see in the life of Samson, I think there's a couple of questions we need to ask. And the first is this: am I using, or are my gifts used only for personal accomplishment? Are my gifts used only for personal accomplishment? Now, some of you may be very familiar with, others, all this is new with respect to Samson. But what we have read, clearly, we're picking up midstream, and there's a larger story that's going on that really kind of starts back in chapter 13 of Judges. And what you have is this couple. There's a man whose name is Manoah. His wife is unnamed, but they are childless. And they desperately want for God to give them a child. And God sends an angel and announces the fact they are going to have a child. Not just any child, they're going to have specifically a son. But God says this child is going to have the totality of his days set apart and consecrated for me. And that would be tangibly demonstrated through what was known as a Nazirite vow. Now, sometimes you could have an individual that would, for a season of time, for a portion of their life, they would be a Nazirite. This was unusual because from birth to death, all of Samson's days are to be set apart for the service of God. And it would be kind of like wearing a wedding ring that would demonstrate the commitment. And the visible sign of this commitment would be threefold. First, he was never to touch anything unclean. Secondly, he was never to have any connection with anything alcoholic or even grapes themselves. And third, he was never to cut his hair. And so all of these were going to be signs to any that would see him, hey, this guy is different. Some people might have thought, oh, this guy's crazy, but it's conveying the sign, there's something different in the sense that his life has been set apart in totality to the Lord's service. As you get into chapter 14, long story short, Samson is approaching a Philistine town, and a lion jumps out. This lion jumps out, and Samson, we're told that the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him, and he tears this lion apart as if it's just a little baby goat or something, much smaller and that couldn't hurt you. And so he has ripped a lion to shreds. And he probably thought, Shazam. It seems this is the first time that he realizes that he is possessing what it can only be described as supernatural strength. In fact, when you think of Samson, there's probably two things that come to mind. You probably think of his hair and you think of his strength, and the two are very much connected. But as the story of Samson unfolds, we see that he kills this lion. The next thing that we see him do, he captures 300 foxes, which is in itself a feat. I don't know where you'd even find 300 foxes, but he gets 300 foxes. Besides that, in chapter 15, he does that. He breaks out of being confined with 2 brand new ropes, and with the jawbone of a donkey kills 1,000 Philistines. All of this is completely demonstrating this guy is, well, he's gifted with unique, amazing, different strength. I mean, his ability is not like those of his peers, not like those of his enemies. He has been given and uniquely gifted by God with this, what can only be described as supernatural strength. By the time you get to chapter 16, Samson is, again, pursuing a relationship with a woman who's out of bounds. And she's out of bounds because she's a Philistine. And God had wanted to make sure that his people, that their closest relationships, like marriage, would be reserved for those that shared the same commitment between they and the Lord. And so Delilah is a woman who's out of bounds. But Samson falls in love with her. And the Philistines, who've now lost gobs of their people, they think, we need to do something. We've got to figure out some way to neutralize Samson. He's a threat, and every time it seems like that we have him cornered, he kills more of us. Every time we win, we lose. And so they go to Delilah and they say, what we need you to do is find out how this joker is so strong. Figure out and let us know what it is that we could do that could actually confine him and constrain him, and we'll give you a gob of money. She's like, oh, okay. And she might have liked Samson, who knows? But she liked the thought of money more. And so she tries to sweet talk Samson. Oh, Samson, oh, you're so strong with those big muscles. Oh, my goodness. I was like, what could somebody do, maybe like is there any way that somebody could just like confine you, like restrain you that you couldn't get out of? And so he tells her 3 different things, time after time after time. And what he tells her in each instance is not the truth. So if I'm tied with bowstrings, if I'm tied with new rope, if my hair is woven into a loom, all of these instances of what he says to her, they turn out not to be true. And each instance, Samson is breaking free of this stuff. And it's, again, demonstrating this amazing strength, this gifted amount of strength that he has. And then finally, what we read starting in verse 16, it says that she's pleaded with him until she's finally wore him out. And he says, listen, here's the truth. My hair has never been cut because I'm a Nazirite to God from birth. If I'm shaved, my strength will leave me. I'll become weak, and like any other man. When you think of, if you're familiar at all with the story of Samson, if you are like me and you've heard this story and read this story or had coloring sheets and you've filled them in since children's Sunday school class for years, when you hear the name Samson, you probably think Samson is a strong guy. And he is. He is strong, but I would say that we're not speaking accurately when we talk about Samson being a strong guy. Here's a more accurate statement. Samson is a guy who has been gifted by God with physical strength. Samson is a guy who has been gifted by God with physical strength. God gives him this strength because God has specific plans and purposes that he wants to use this gift in Samson's life to accomplish. But what does Samson do with this giftedness? Again, here's a guy that the totality, the sum of all of his days is to be dedicated and set apart to the service of God. And God has given him this amazing gift because God wants to use him in amazing and significant ways. And what does this guy who has this amazing gift from God, what does he do? Well, he uses that gift, but I want you to pay attention to how he uses it. Constantly and exclusively to accomplish his personal goals and to exact revenge and to act out vendettas against others. Every time, so it starts with the lion. The first time that in truth, he shouldn't have even been in this place, and if he had been paying attention to where he was going and was going into this Philistine city to try to marry a Philistine woman, this would have never happened. So he's in the wrong place, making the wrong choice, and then this lion comes out, and so to save himself, he tears the lion apart. As every time he acts out and lashes out at Philistines and takes their lives, whether through the bone of a donkey or just with his sheer strength, every time he does this, it's all personal. It's all what Samson wants to do. Every bit of it is Samson thinking about myself, advancing my aspirations, my personal agenda. Now, I said earlier, and you know this to be true, hopefully, that the New Testament absolutely does speak of particular spiritual gifts that God grants to those that are in relationship with Him and or following Him. Beyond those specific spiritual gifts, there are just plain gifts and talents that God gives to people, all people, everywhere, throughout the whole of history. And these gifts can vary. Your gifts may be those that are linked, for example, more to language, like I described, or maybe it's more to music, or Jamie was talking about earlier, we've got a number of guys that are really gifted with understanding how things work, and electrical knowledge, and construction, all kinds of stuff that are just, God has wired them to be able to have a gift in this area, and they're using that gift. But listen, all people have this giftedness, and we've got to realize, as those that are walking with Him, that every bit of that giftedness, all of it, for saved people, for lost people, everybody, all of that giftedness comes from God. It could be physical strength, as it was in Samson's case. It could be financial strength, that you just kind of get numbers, and it just makes sense to you. It could be, again, linguistics. It could be music. All of these things. The question, though, is this. As I have that gift and I'm using it, and hear me, I'm not suggesting that God doesn't gift us in ways that we can't use that do benefit us. Like if numbers come easy to you, it makes sense to use that. Maybe in engineering, maybe it's in accounting, and to do well with that, to make a good living with it. There's nothing wrong with that, so hear me as I say that. But the question is this. As you have those gifts, whatever they are they just used ultimately for you and your accomplishments? Is it for you accomplishing your dream? Is it for you building your business? Is it for you earning that position at work? Is it for you getting that certificate? Is it for you getting that particular award? Are you using your giftedness exclusively for personal accomplishment? I have always been amazed and kind of puzzled by what you see in bodybuilding championships, whether it's male or female. So you wind up with these individuals who have just muscles upon muscles. And once they get strong, and like they have lifted weights and lifted weights and lifted weights, and likely many of them have also ingested some other chemicals as well, but they're just kind of freakishly large, insane muscles everywhere. And so once they get this big, they decide, I think I might be able to enter one of these contests. And so bodybuilding contests, apparently there's 3 requirements. You need to have a lot of muscles. You need to be greased up like a pig. And you need to have skimpy underwear, really skimpy underwear. So you get these individuals who are just wearing patches or a loincloth or whatever it is, and they come out there and they are shiny enough you could fry chicken on them. And they come out on stage and they flex and they do. I don't understand the laughter. Never mind. They're doing that, and people ooh and ah, and they're judged, and they're ranked, and so the winner gets this, probably some big trophy, and they get this title, they get this check, they get whatever. And I have always been puzzled because I'm thinking, man, that is such a waste. Here you got this guy that is so strong. You got this lady that's so strong. This is what I'm thinking. If I managed a Home Depot, I'd be thinking, I want that guy in the lumber section. Think of all the 2x4s that joker could grab. Man. If I owned 2 men in a truck, I would think, when is the next competition so I can get on the front row and as soon as it's over, say, hey, listen, I've got a job for you. But whether it's working in the lumber section of Home Depot or whether it is working for 2 men in a truck, my suspicion is that if any of these individuals were approached with that prospect, with that offer about working in that capacity, I'm almost certain that that offer would be declined. Why? Because they don't want to use those muscles. They don't want to use that strength for anything other than demonstration. Look at me. Look at me. Now listen, I'm not suggesting that the gifts that you have, you just want to merely be a demonstration or the foundation of a demonstration of pride in your life. I'm not saying that. But I am saying this. Too many times what we do as people, we take those gifts that we have just freely been given by God and we use them, and the only person ultimately that we're thinking about with respect to the use of it is ourselves. Let me get this job, let me make more money, let me get this certificate, let me get this accomplishment, it all revolves around me. Samson has this amazing gift of strength, and every time he's using it, it seems that he's using it wrong because all he's doing, it's all about him. Everything that Samson does, and so many times we almost laud him as a hero, but Samson is a colossal failure. He's a terrible example. He's a lousy example of a proper use and good stewardship of giftedness because it's all about him. I'm not saying that God has given you supernatural strength, but maybe God's wired you in some uniquely strong way. Likely you know what those areas are. You may even have a job in that particular field, or you may be studying and preparing to work in that particular field. But here's the question. Are you possessing and using that gift just like anyone else who doesn't know the Lord? Because that's how they're doing it. Thinking about me. Or is it that you're thinking beyond yourself about something that's maybe bigger picture? Am I using my giftedness the right way? Well, ask yourself, are my gifts used only for personal accomplishment? But then ask yourself this, am I using my giftedness disconnected from God? Am I using my giftedness disconnected from God? All right, so Samson has finally told Delilah the truth, that it has something to do with his hair. I actually think that Samson likely thought he was telling the truth, but what he said actually wasn't. And throughout the whole of my life, especially as a kid, I always thought, like when he says, if my hair's cut, I won't be strong. But if that's the case, that means that Samson was strong because he had long hair. But I want you to understand, Samson wasn't strong because he had long hair. Samson was strong because God was with him. When he has told Delilah this, his hair gets cut off. And then she says, Samson, verse 20, the Philistines are here. And it says, when he woke from his sleep, he said, I'll escape as I did before. He's like, I've got this. This happened stacks of times before, and I can get out of this again. Not going to be a problem. But it says this, he did not know that the Lord had left him. He did not know that the Lord had left him. Samson, I believe, has been using this gift of strength for some time. And he has been using it with pretty marked accomplishment. But it seems that the totality of his use of this gift is completely removed in his mind from the fact, this has something to do with God, and God giving me this gift, and God wanting me to use this gift somehow in connection with him. Samson winds up, he's captured by the Philistines. He has his eyes gouged out. He's made to push a millstone around. He's the laughing stock of Israel. He is just humiliated by the Philistines. In fact, he becomes fodder for them to worship pagan gods. All of this happens, and it's not because Samson was one who lost strength because he lost his long hair. Samson lost his strength because he was disconnected from the strength giver. Over and over and over again, Samson uses his gift, and it seems that he does so having removed God from any part of the equation, any part of the use of that gift. And I believe when Samson looked in the mirror, what he saw was, he saw this strong guy. Look at me. What he didn't see is, hey, there's a guy that God has given a unique gift to for which he's got actual plans to accomplish that are bigger than me. There are two times when God is invoked ultimately in the life of Samson. One happens before he's even born, when an angel comes to his parents and says, hey, this child's going to be born, and his life is going to be dedicated, consecrated to the service of God. The last time God is invoked is when Samson, who has become powerless, his eyes gouged out, he prays in chapter 16 that God might give him strength just one more time. It has nothing to do with hair. It has everything to do with God. God, would you give me strength one more time? Then you know the story. He pushes the pillars down, the building collapses, and he and all these Philistines die on that day. Twice in Samson's life is his life demonstrably connected to God. Once before he is born, and the other in a final act of desperation. What I'm saying to you is this: Samson is a guy who was gifted by God, amazingly gifted by God. But throughout the whole of his life, those gifts, that amazing strength, God was removed from the equation of it. And because of that, what could have been wasn't. And the example that Samson could have been, well, it never ultimately came to fruition. It is the case, and I think the more that time passes, the more it is true that our lives are getting connected to cell phones. And so much of our lives are lived in these devices, and we don't know phone numbers anymore. We keep pictures, we keep bank records, we send money, we buy stuff. All these things are done connected to cell phone. But interestingly, occasionally we still actually use these phones to talk. Do you realize that you can actually still talk on these things? And I know this has happened to me. And I actually use a cell phone a lot to talk on, but so I know it's happened to me a stack of times. Maybe it has to you over the years as well. Let's say you're talking to somebody, and maybe they've asked you a question, or maybe you've had a bad day, and you are recounting this whatever that you have experienced. And this is traumatic for you. This has been a bad day, and you're sharing this because you really want somebody to encourage you. Or there's this crossroads of decision that you're at, and you really want them to speak into your circumstance. And so you're talking, and you go on and on and on and on, and you're explaining, and you're talking, and you're passionate, you're all these things, and you stop for a moment, and they don't say anything. And likely it has happened to you, it's happened to me. I thought, well, did they zone out? Are they paying attention? And then you say, hello? And you hear nothing. And you say, hello? And you hear nothing. And all of a sudden you realize, hey, we lost the connection somewhere. And I didn't even notice. How many times have you been talking on a dead phone? I mean, it has happened repeatedly. It has happened repeatedly to me, and likely to you as well. And here's the interesting thing. You could have Apple or Samsung's best phone. You could be with the #1 carrier in the United States with the most expansive coverage. You could have all of that, but if you lose the connection, nothing you say is of consequence. You can have all of that, but if you lose the connection, nothing that you say is actually of consequence. Samson, I believe, when we're told in this passage that we read this morning, when his hair was cut, I don't believe all of a sudden that the muscles that he probably had, that all of a sudden they atrophied and shrunk, and he all of a sudden looked like, California raisin, just shriveled up. I don't think that happened. He probably looked the same. And so when he jumped up thinking, I'm going to get out of this again, I'm going to use these muscles one more time. They've never failed me. He discovered that the gift that he had actually no consequence because it was disconnected from the giver. So let me ask you this. It's not, are you gifted? It's, you are gifted. But are you using them the right way? And one of the ways that you can tell is this. Am I using this in connection with or connected at all to God? How can you figure all this stuff out? Let me give you a couple of questions to ask yourself, just to kind of tie this together and just kind of where the rubber meets the road application thoughts. You do have, every single one of us, and if you're watching today, every single one of us has giftedness. We do. Do you use them only or exclusively for yourself and for your interest? Or is it just your job and just your company? Or is that the only constraint in which your gift is used? Does it matter to you if your giftedness, whatever it is, if it is not intentionally used as part of God accomplishing something in your part of the world through that gift? If that's not happening, are you okay with that? So you've got this gift, and if God's not using it in any way, or you haven't allowed God to use it, are you okay with that? Would you say, honestly, I'm not asking you, but just in your heart, would you say that you lean on or you depend more on your giftedness or more on God? And here's the reality. Very easily over time, we can start off with a gift where we are leaning on God, but the more that we use that gift, the more refined it gets, the better we get at using it. And what can happen is that we walk away from God and don't even notice it. Have you ever said something like this to God? Thank you for uniquely gifting me. I appreciate and am grateful you have gifted me in ways that benefit me. But I believe you've got greater goals than that. Will you burden me about ways that you want me to use them? But so far I haven't. And the last question is this. As a person who is gifted, if you're someone that says that you have a personal relationship with the Lord, if God were to walk away from you, how long before you would notice? Samson is, to me, one of the most tragic statements that we, certainly in this passage, read, but maybe one of the most tragic in the Bible. It says that he did not know that the Lord had left him. Gifted, to be sure. But using the gifts in the right way? Not a chance. So the question is, as you look at this passage, you see Samson, but do you see yourself? Will you bow your heads with me?